the Egyptian wife of Joseph, Asenath, bore to him at least 2 children we know of, Ephraim and Manasseh, which are automatically considered Israelites because they were adopted by Jacob, Israel. Yes. They are assigned territory in the land. Yes. But they are not Hebrew or Israelitish stock. So what do you do with this when you pick up a book that's trying to tell you they're all Jewish? But the same people will tell you, but you can only be Jewish by matrilineal descent. The mother must be a Jew. And I'm showing you that there were a lot of strangers in the woodpile here. A lot. Okay, so I want to make sure that I get this right up front. What I am doing is not meant in any way, shape, or form. It does not connote hatred. It does not, nothing pejorative. What it does, what I'm doing in this series is trying to set the record straight. And like one of the messages that completely blessed me in a stack of messages in my office said, it's very clear, the caller said, it's very clear that I don't have any other agenda than trying to get to the truth, and that is the truth. So I've been presenting, and we have been on a series which kind of has morphed into another direction, so to speak. So what I've been trying to tell you, and unfortunately it's everywhere, and as much as I'm going to den this in, I'm hoping that when you start your own research and you start your own digging, you will pick up these mistakes instantaneously. So I brought, this is the Jewish History Atlas, Martin Gilbert, Macmillan Publishing, and I want you to look at what I've highlighted right there on the top. Can you read that? It says early Jewish migrations about 2000 BC. I'm glad that some of you are finally catching on. If you read down below here, look at the bottom line, if you can see that. Jewish settlement in Egypt from about 1800 to 1500 BC. Cities built for Pharaoh by Jewish forced labor. Do you understand what I'm pointing out? Okay. Now, don't think this is a worthless book. I'm actually going to use it to show you something in a minute. It has nothing to do with nomenclature. But you're going to find everywhere you look this confusion and conflation. And part of the problem is even in a book like this, A Short History of Judaism, by Lavinia and Dan Cohn Sherbrooke, One World Oxford Publishing. Just take a look at something which will come out in my message. God promised that he would be the father of a great nation, singular. As a symbol of the promise, the practice of circumcision was instituted, Genesis 17. If you missed that one, let me read it to you. And let me first say, Jews and Christians share the same, we call it Old Testament. The only thing that differs is after the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, the order of the books may be different, but the books are the same. We're not talking about New Testament. We're not including that. We're only talking about the Old Testament. So why is this a problem? Because this person is quoting Genesis 17. And Genesis 17:4 says, as for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of, can you tell me what that says? Many nations. Oh, now here comes the crowning jewel, because this person says, father of a great nation. Again, just a little turn, right? If you didn't know any better, and you were reading this, you'd say, yes, and he's referring to the Jewish people. But sorry, that is not a right, accurate, and true statement. This is not, and I don't want anybody here, of course, people do this all the time, they take my words out of context. I am not anti-Jewish. I'm not put whatever you want. I'm for the truth. Now here's the clincher. You ever heard because I've got a ton of Jewish friends, at least I used to have a ton. You ever heard a Jewish person say, oh, the Goyim? You know what that is? What is it? Gentile, non-Jew, right? So, excuse me, but what the hell are you going to do with this? Genesis 17:4 says, thou shalt be a father of many nations. And the word for nations is goyim. If you don't read Hebrew, I'm sorry, but if you do, let's see here. Father of many nations. Can you see that? Yes, ma'am. G, Vav, or Gimel, Vav, Ayin, or I'm sorry, it's Gimel, Vav, Yod, Mem, plural, nations. Now you can say, well, if you pick it up in the Septuagint, it'll say ethnon. But if this is the book that we share, then right there, Houston, we have a problem, okay? So what we're doing is we're looking to find origins. You have way too many people out there that will ascribe Judaism all the way back to Noah or Abraham. Neither one of those can take that nomenclature. So let me now start my message, because that was all just kind of a little shock value, okay? According to the biblical account of the descent into Egypt, which we trace from the book of Genesis, which involves Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, and I will keep doing that until all the listeners know that Israel first is a man who was formerly named Jacob. Then his children, who are called the children of Israel, that first generation, and all of their descendants, including those that would become enslaved, are the children of Israel. They all stem from essentially one man. There was no land back then called Israel. So let's park that thought for a second. So we navigate Jacob, who is Israel, moving with all of his children, and all of his children later to be referred to as the children of Israel, to the refuge of Egypt into the land of Goshen. I told you that this book had value. So if you're interested, there is Goshen in Egypt, okay? Just so you can put it in your mind of what we're talking about. And by the way, if you're looking for where Abraham came from, Ur of Chaldees, this is his homeland. So we're not looking at a big swath, even though it would be a big swath to walk. We're not looking at massive divides in a continent or something. So they make their way down to Goshen by way of the fact that Jacob, who is Israel, his most beloved son Joseph, who is thought to be dead, and that's a whole entire story I don't want to get into. If you don't know the story, please go into Genesis and read it for yourself, but was taken prisoner for a time and then released and ascended to the second in command, just second under Pharaoh. That was his reward for his good deeds, and as I said, if you don't know the story, please read up on it. I don't have time to review that. That would grant the entire clan of Jacob, who is Israel, to live in the land of Goshen for the period indefinite, but it began because there was a famine in the land. So Joseph basically, by his understanding of visions and whatnot, saves his brother and basically saves probably the then known world of that area that was in famine. Now, Jacob, who is Israel, will adopt Joseph's half-Egyptian sons, and so we're clear that means the mother was 100% Egyptian, okay? Ephraim and Manasseh will also bear the name, the children of Israel, even though they're adopted, but they will bear that name. And I want you to keep this in mind, because no matter what I say today, this message is about how things can get so warped. And I'm sorry, but this is no different than the Catholic Church making up doctrines that were never in the Bible and calling it dogma, and you must abide by that. And I reject that, because that is man-made ideology with definite agendas. So hear me out. And I'm not wanting people to go emotional on me. I'm looking for people who are digging for facts. You get emotional, you'll get protective about the baggage you carry that you think may be right. And I'm not interested in what people think. We're looking to try and peel back the layers of this proverbial onion to figure things out, because there has been just too much smushing and homogenization and conflation of things. So we know in several different passages, in several different verses of the Bible, that it is said that the children of Israel would be strangers in the land of Egypt. They would be afflicted, and then they would come out a mighty people into a land that God had sworn to them. What the Bible does not exactly tell us is how long they were living in Egypt autonomously, even on a kingly level, to how long they were enslaved in Egypt's bondage. We don't know that. We can speculate. But this matters for many reasons. Just put on your thinking cap for a second and think about this. They are not practicing any real hard form of religion. There's been no prescription except for, if you think about it, from the time of Abraham, which I'll come back to in a minute, from the time of Abraham, circumcision. That was about it, okay? So whatever they were practicing in Goshen might have been a combination of things. And this is my opinion. I speculate that although we know Joseph and Jacob had exchanges with God, that doesn't mean that all the descendants worshipped in one singular way the one true living God. There is good evidence to believe that they also worshipped other deities. And we have archaeological good evidence of that. Now, I'm a big believer in something. The stones, the earth does not lie. People can be in error in how they interpret it, but the evidence that's in the ground, it does not lie. So we can put together a brief history, but the important thing is to ask, were they worshiping God as we know it today? And the answer is no. Okay? No. We don't have that much information? No. Now, one of the worst things that has happened is this massive homogenization in terms of this period, to say that the family of Jacob, Israel, as I just showed you in this book, and I can keep bringing the books if you like, to state that Jacob, Israel, is being referred to as Jewish. They were not. And by now anyone listening to me knows that Abraham was not Jewish. All you've got to do is look into, and I plead with people who are shaking their fist in anger at me, look into the history of Ur, a very advanced civilization, but they were not worshiping in a singular way, like a monotheism. They were not practicing that. Paganism, idol worship. In fact, we read in the book itself, Terah, Abraham's dad, was an idol worshiper, which tells you most likely what the father does, the son usually does too, but we're not told anything about that regarding Abram. Could that be conveniently omitted? I'm just saying, let's not romanticize or fantasize. I want to read what's here, but I'm not interested in people painting a picture that may not be completely accurate. As I said, we're all guilty of this, of kind of depicting the people in the Bible as we'd like to see them, and maybe not as they actually were. Does that make sense? Okay. We have key words that are used in the conversations between God and Abram. Your seed, your descendants, but nowhere does God identify himself except as the names that he reveals himself, and in no way can connote Jew or Judaism, nor Abraham for that matter, so I'm just repeating myself. But the conversation about sorting people out can and does begin here. Probably it will take us hundreds of years from the conversation had with Abram. It will take us hundreds of years to see Judaism emerge as we know it. And I'm going to back this up. So for all those people out there, you don't want to hear this, shut me off, tune me out. I'm only interested in telling you the truth, and it's not the truth according to me, it's from this book. You can take the information and do whatever you want with it. So why did God make a covenant with Abram? He's an idol worshiper. He comes from a foreign land. He's not even from some, we know his background is not something stellar. And the covenant itself is no ordinary covenant. It's no longer a rainbow, as was Noah's. This one is, you got to circumcise. And if you don't know what that means, I don't know what to tell you. Now, the covenant itself is not ordinary because it actually touches the human body. It's the cutting of the human body. So before I go down the pathway of talking about this covenant, let me tell you that, and this is the hard part, I don't want anybody here thinking that I'm negating or I'm lessening, but I'd like to point something out. If you study history, particularly in antiquity, you will find that the oldest extant proof of circumcision was practiced by the Egyptians. On the door of the 6th dynasty tomb of Pharaoh Enkamehor, dated from 2355 to 2300 BC, a circumcision scene is depicted, placing this before Abram's time. It is the oldest extant depiction of an act of circumcision from ancient Egypt. They are not the only people. The Egyptians, that is the oldest proof we have. To the most current, which would be the descendants of Muhammad and followers of Muhammad. And there is a split even amongst those who are adherents to Islam. Most do what is called circumcision, khitan or khitana. I'm probably not saying it right. Some will follow and do it at the age of 13, because that's when Ishmael was circumcised. Others adhere to an 8-day, but the problem with that is those that adhere to an 8-day do not line up properly with the prescribed ordinances for these peoples. There's a lot of, even inside Islam, there's a lot of discussion about this which doesn't end agreeably. Let's leave that one alone. All right, so I want to now go to Genesis 17. I'm taking you there now to point some certain things out that will start to make sense of this covenant. So here we go, Genesis 17. And when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect. I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. Now, this is not the first time that God has spoken to Abram. But this one is kind of the, let's seal the deal now. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Goyim. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee. Again, you can't miss the fact that God repeats this over and over, and the Hebrew even has it. You know what the Hebrew plural is? The yod and mem at the end of a word. So every time you have it would be goy in the singular or goyim in the plural. Goyim is what appears in the Hebrew each time. And I will make thee exceedingly fruitful. I will make nations of thee. Kings shall come out of thee. I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Now don't read this and go, see, God said it there and that's that. Because if you're not reading the whole unfolding story and you don't get the whole picture, you might close the book and say, oh, well, I'm going to look at the modern events and say who's right or who's wrong. No, sorry, can't do that. You need the whole picture. And when the whole picture becomes clear, the whole picture becomes abundantly clear. No ambiguity. So he says, I will give unto thee and unto thy seed the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And remember those words, I will be their God. Now, years later, when God gives the law on Mount Sinai to Moses, those first 3 parts of the law will be immediately broken. So right out the gate, I will be their God could never stick with these people. And I'm going to prove it from the book, not from my opinion. I don't have one here. Let the word speak for itself. God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. Ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin. It shall be a token. And don't laugh at that. The Hebrew word is oath, pledge or witness, assurance, or in many cases, a sign. Like in Genesis, the sign from separating day and night, a sign, a symbol, okay? And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man-child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. So right away there, we have also this something that says, if every man-child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, circumcise, okay? He that is born in thy house and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised, or my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. The uncircumcised man-child whose flesh and of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. And if you keep reading, you realize, as you jump down a little bit, because there's a word given that Sarai will have a child, even though she's old. But if you jump down, you'll also read, but in verse 21, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abram. So there's something there to be said. And what I want to point out is it is impossible, if you are reading this without an agenda. God gives the covenant of the rainbow to Noah. I will never again flood the earth. But this covenant is different. This is the beginning of marking out a people, but it is not the beginning of Judaism. Now, after the process of separating out these people, if we are not cautious, we omit the father of many nations and think singularly about one group of people instead of many nations. But these many nations will include the dispersed northern tribes, the southern kingdom. It will also include Arabs, Assyrians, Bedouins, you name it, from the different wives that he'll have. It will include kings, and not just a singular King David. It will include kings across the board. So right on its face, to claim Abraham to a singular faith is an error. Right here, we have no evidence except that the Lord has spoken to him and given them the sign of the covenant and told him one particular thing, which is a driving force through this book of Genesis: thy seed, descending, thy seed to Isaac, to Jacob, and then Jacob's seed. And why was God doing this? Because there was a line that God was trying to keep pure, if you will. There's a problem which we're going to uncover in a minute. So my question to you is, how can one group make a claim that this singular act distinguishes and sets it apart, and that becomes the right to say, well, this is maybe what you practice now, but it was not identified as such then? Hold that thought. You see, the problem of sorting out that God spoke to people or chose a people right away does not make them something until God starts to unfold his plan. And then if the plan is adhered to and a relationship develops, then we have the beginning of something that we can start putting together, but it doesn't happen here. There's another disconnect. We have a tendency to think of the children of Israel as untainted or disconnected from all others, so that when they come out of Egypt, delivered by Moses, we envision them a la Cecil B. DeMille. It's only the Hebrew children coming out. Really? You believe that? I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm going to show you. Exodus 12. And this happens after the Passover. Exodus 12, beginning at verse 37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men beside children. But here's what I want you to focus on. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, flocks, herds, even very much cattle. So mixed multitude, let's take a look. If you have a Bible like mine, in the margin, verse 38 says, a great mixture. But if you look at that word in Hebrew, (12 and 38). Okay, it says here, other people. That's erev, rav. Erev, rav. Other people, many other people. Erev, rav. But that word erev, interesting word. If you trace it back in the Strong's, or in the concordance rather, lexicon, you'll come up with two words. Evening or darkness, or go trace it as far back as 6152, the number attached to this, and you'll find the word Arab. Okay, so, and a mixed multitude went up also with them. And I'm pointing this out for a reason. Do you really believe the nature of humans? We all have basic fundamental needs. Basic chemistry between people has not changed ever, I don't think, except for maybe in the last 5 years. So, methinks right away there is a good sign that this mixed multitude that joined itself to Israel will be all of the references that come up later to if a foreigner, if a stranger. You notice that we'll be looking at these passages today. We'll talk about foreigners or strangers accompanying somehow they're in the camp with the children of Israel. Well, where the heck did they come from? That's one, okay? 12:38, that tells you they joined themselves to those people. Now, if you're not sure about my interpretation of this word, let me show you a couple of places where it appears so you can kind of rest your soul a little bit, because everybody's got some uptightness about things when I point them out. So King James has translated this word in a few different ways. Here, in Nehemiah, don't turn there because it says the same thing. In Nehemiah 13:3, now it came to pass when they heard the law that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. That's in Nehemiah 13:3. And then other translations, and you've got the word appearing again in Jeremiah 25:20, 25:24, 50:37, Ezekiel 35. All of these references are to foreigners. So, a mixed multitude. Even if you want to make it very generic, foreigners joined themselves to the children of Israel on their journey out of Egypt, on the way out. That becomes pretty important. Why? Because we tend to paint this picture. I don't know if it's because we've all seen too many movies or something, that they were singular, a singular people came out, and somehow they're isolated. All right, love the idea of this, but it ain't so. So, if we keep reading, we see the idea of foreigners joining themselves to the children of Israel becomes more and more clear because of the instructions given to Moses to sort people out. And now we're actually beginning to see some markers, if you will, so that as we move on in Exodus, you're seeing something become more and more evident of God marking out a people, not yet referred to as Jews. Now, in the same chapter I just pointed you to, verse 43 says, and the Lord said unto Moses and Aaron, this is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. Okay? No one's allowed to eat the Passover. No stranger is allowed to eat it. And interestingly enough, I hate to say this, but if you look at this section here, no stranger, this other word in Hebrew, nekar, alien, foreign, stranger, not a part of the original group. But only one criteria could make that stranger included. Do you know what it is? Yeah. Not being born by a Hebrew or Israelitish mother, if you want to make a reinterpretation of concepts. Circumcision. You want to eat the Passover meal in the Promised Land, you're going to have to do a little chop chop. By the way, they were given the instructions for the Passover, but they are told that they will not celebrate the Passover until they enter the Promised Land. That is verse 5. When it shall be, when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month. So evidently, and there may be a passage I've missed. I'm going to tell you when I think there may be an omission somewhere. But it seems like they may not have celebrated the Passover until they entered into the land. Now, what does that make or break anything? No. But we also tend to think that these times marked out are directly associated, unfortunately, here we go again. The Passover is automatically assumed to be a Jewish act, freeing the children who were Jewish out of Egypt's bondage. No. I have said this before and I'll say it again. Everything in this book, Old Testament, points to Christ. This is why the Apostle Paul in the New Testament could call Christ our Passover, not their Passover, our Passover, because it was a symbol designated to remind the children of Israel, yes, that they were delivered out of Egypt's bondage, which we in the New Testament look at as a life living in darkness out in the world in sin and being delivered by God and being brought into the light. So I don't know how you want to approach this, but we could say here very clearly, God is beginning to sort out a people. Just put a period right there. And circumcision, if you want to partake of the Passover. But God gave prescribed sacrifices and offerings. And I have already said, you can look to any primitive culture. This is where it gets important. What I'm going to say is important. Almost every primitive culture. Look into antiquity, they all had sacrifices and offerings. Almost every culture did. The Aztecs, the Incas, the Chinese were doing it in 1600 BC. You've got Mesopotamia back in 8000 BC. Everybody was doing it. It was like, it's a fad. It's like, whatever the fad is today, like TikTok, all right, let's go do a sacrifice. All right. But here's the thing. On all of these different fronts, it was to placate, appease multiple gods, votive offerings, libations, to appease, to please, to placate the gods, plural. Never pointing to anything else. Basically, whatever was offered under the auspices that offering, right down to, if you want to talk about the Celts, who were big fans of human sacrifice, all designed to appease the gods. But here we have something a little bit different. And why do I say that? Because all of the sacrifices and offerings that God gave to the children of Israel point to Christ. There's a value. It's no longer just something. They are emblems, shadows, and types themselves. Take something that is perfect, without blemish, and offer it. This is Christ. Let's move on a little bit. So once God gives the 10 Commandments, we begin to see a concept of, we'll call it relating to God. This is the first time we're seeing some concept of God laying out rules of relating. So, take a look at something. Exodus 20, just a few pages away if you were at the last place I stopped. And Exodus 20 begins the 10 Commandments. And this passage starts with saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. What's the first thing he says? Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now ask yourself the question. Don't look at this as, this is the 10 Commandments. I've read the 10 Commandments my whole life. Look at this by saying, why would God start there? Thou shalt have no other gods before me, because it makes it abundantly clear. You cannot see it in this book. But if you go back into antiquity, you can see these people were at any point worshiping a whole, and you don't need my word on this. As you comb through here, you will find them worshiping, throwing their children into the fire, the god of Molech. You'll find all kinds of deities being worshipped by these people, even though they know they should not, including the golden calf event, which happens in Exodus 32. While Moses is up on the mount receiving the law, these people can't wait. How long is he going to be? And it is the children of Israel basically coming to Aaron and saying, make us something we can worship right now. So hence, take off all your gold, let's put it in a pot, and we'll make a golden calf. And they were worshiping that thing. What's the second thing he says? Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. See, my problem here is this. People tend to romanticize this and not think of why God would say this. He knew what was in the heart of man already. That's the thing we cannot play games with. Just like at this very moment, God knows what's in our hearts. Whether we have love for him, whether we have faith, whether we are abiding in his word. He knows all these things. It doesn't make you better or worse than somebody else, but he knows everything that could be known about you and about me. So what would make these people any different? This is why he starts with, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make any graven images or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or what is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. So right there, three things will be violated. Now God is presenting a way to relate. That's the beginning of establishing a people. But if the people don't abide by what God says, what do you do with that? Does that still make them the people of God? Because here's the problem. The problem is, I think, what every Bible student might grapple with. Exodus and Leviticus, we see God giving a moral code, ethical instruction to this wandering band. A structure begins to be seen. For example, one can only approach God now through the priesthood. This will be established all in the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible, which is radically different than before, when God just approached Abram, or he approached Isaac, or he spoke to Jacob. Radically different. So there is a marked change going on right here. But again, if we're not careful, we'll put all of this through a filter that says, well, this is how Judaism developed. No, I'm sorry to tell you, this is a structure that we can call a Hebrew worship practice, the beginning, the genesis of Israelitish practices in the desert, but not yet known as Judaism. So, we comb the pages of Leviticus, and we have many references. I just finished talking about this not even 10 minutes ago, to strangers. But there's a pole shift that happens, and let me show you what that is. So remember, there seemed to be this negative connotation towards strangers at all. And then suddenly there's a shift in, let's see here, I hope I'm reading this from the right place. Yep. So in Leviticus 17, thou shalt say unto them, whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the stranger which sojourn among you, that offereth a burnt offering or sacrifice, and bring it not unto the door. So we can tell that there were people, there were strangers there, but there is a word there, I believe it's in 17:13. And whatsoever man there be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn among you, which hunteth and catcheth the beast or fowl that may be eaten, he shall even pour out the blood thereof, cover it with the dust. There's so many references here to the stranger, the stranger, the stranger. But one reference in particular that caught my attention, which is, he shall be as one born among you. Thou shalt love him as thyself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And it appears this shift towards strangers, from where God said no, suddenly strangers are being mentioned on a regular basis more and more. And why is this important to us? Because I'm telling you something, knowing the nature of what happened here, in the future, generations in the future, when they finally get into the land and they're told to expulse the people in the land, they cohabitate with the people that lived in the land. They don't get rid of them. They had strangers with them, which tells you that there had to be a commingling. People were probably hooking up, whether it was through marriage or otherwise, and bearing children. So the lines are already muddled. So by the time we get to something like the book of Numbers, which covers basically the bulk of the 40 years and the earliest experiences of the children of Israel under a theocracy, under God, when the people obeyed, they enjoyed his blessing and protection. When they disobeyed, they received judgment. Despite all the good that God did and all the mercy that God showed these people, it's at this time that God wiped out the generation that failed to take him at his word. And that is in the Bible, my friends. So it's only the likes of Joshua and Caleb that would remain to prepare the next generation to enter the promised land. Because he said, what? They were to basically obey the words and they would be led in. And also, just kind of walking you through a generic concept of something, the fifth and final book of the Pentateuch, Deuteronomy, broken into 3 discourses, 1:6 through 4:43, 4:44 through 26:19, and 27 through 31. The bulk, that's the bulk of the content of the book, were given to the Israelites camped in the plains of Moab. And the book ends on a low note, not on a high note, on a low note. Moses is denied entrance into the promised land for his disobedience. He gets to look at it, but he's denied entrance. And God made good on his words. They were commanded to not do that which was right in their own eyes, which would later come to characterize a whole nation. But those that were admonished to follow God, they paid the price. They were not let in. The scripture says God strewed their bones in the wilderness. So this is what I think is my problem. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing it is a repeated concept, disobedience, disobedience. God says, if you do this, I bless you, and if you do that, I curse you. And specifically on the subject, we're looking at God's, we'll call it covenant commitment. So, the more I think about this, I start to look at why we have accepted books like this. Is it our ignorance? Is it our fault because we've been led to believe certain things? And let me paint a picture for you. Because part of sorting this out is also addressing some, what I call traditions within Judaism that would make their word void. When you start tracing all these lines, you find out that by the time you get into their entrance into Canaan, things have changed on a grand level. And let me explain. Let's take the example of Rahab. Remember, she's part of the story of Jericho. She's the one who hid the spies. She's most likely a Canaanite. And what's fascinating is she will marry, in the genealogies in the New Testament, she will marry Salmon and is recorded in the line of Christ in the genealogical records of the Bible. Yet she is a Canaanite. And if I'm trying to show you a pattern, it's that the Bible, the Old Testament, is peppered with strangers, foreigners, people who do not fit the category of what modern Jewry says a Jewish person must be. So, you see a pattern, and I don't care whether you're Jew or Gentile here. I don't care whether you're Christian or Jew or whatever your faith is. You can't start twisting and making concepts. Let me just point something out. If you go as far back as you can, I'm looking at Abram, which I pointed out. He is what he is, Ur of Chaldees. But the same people who will call Abraham Jew will also ascribe that Isaac's wife, Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, that she must be part of the children of Israel, or she might be a Hebrew, but in fact, she is a descendant from pagan ancestry on both sides of Nahor and his wife. But there's no questioning the status of her children, right? We shouldn't never do that. Do you see where I'm going with this? Because you can't have it both ways. You can't play tiddlywinks and say, well, it's all this. This book, you either believe it and take it as it is, or you don't. And you don't start to try and rearrange it to make it fit your narrative. That, I think, is blasphemy. Okay? That's just my opinion there. Let's keep going. So I mentioned at the very opening of my message, the Egyptian wife of Joseph, Asenath, bore to him at least 2 children we know of, Ephraim and Manasseh, which are automatically considered Israelites because they were adopted by Jacob, Israel. Yes. They are assigned territory in the land. Yes. But they are not Hebrew or Israelite stock. So what do you do with this when you pick up a book that's trying to tell you they're all Jewish? But the same people will tell you, but you can only be Jewish by matrilineal descent. The mother must be a Jew. And I'm showing you that there were a lot of strangers in the woodpile here. A lot. I'm not done. How could Moses be married to Zipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest named Jethro, who was not an Israelite, nor a Hebrew, but a wandering tribe of Arabs? You might say, well, didn't you say Arabs could or couldn't be? Yes, but they're identified as such, so leave it alone. I can't tell you if they were or weren't. But they were a wandering band of Arabs, not in the, we'll call it the chosen line. That union produces 2 children, Gershom and Eliezer. What on earth do you do with that? Samson asks for a Philistine girl to marry for a wife. Solomon marries many foreign women. Bizarre that nowhere the identity of these offspring are brought up, would you say? Rehoboam's mother was an Ammonite, yet he ascended to the throne of Israel, as does Ahaziah, the son of Jezebel, another non-Israelite. And I could go on. The fact of the matter is that we only have to read the genealogies and see the reference is always going to be to the father in this book. I don't care what somebody in the 2nd century AD said. What does the book say? If we are people of the book, you must stay by the book and not have conversations and convoluted, well, let's make up this doctrine. That's just as bad, as I said, as the Roman Catholic Church or even the Protestant Church at times. Stick with the stuff. Makes it a lot simpler for everybody. Well, maybe the idea is that we're trying to whitewash what we don't want to see. That God included a lot of people in his family tree that, according to others, should only belong to one. So, where does this idea, because I'm showing you how many strangers that will eventually produce wives, that will produce children, and you want me to reject the Bible and accept the claim that it's only by the mother that one could, quote-unquote, now be Jewish. Hold that thought for a minute. According to rabbinic law from the 2nd century AD to the present, the offspring of a Gentile mother and a Jewish father is a Gentile, while the offspring of a Jewish mother and a Gentile father is Jewish. If you ask for a scripture verse to back this up, you will be referred to Deuteronomy 7. Let's go there. Let's take a look at how this doctrine lines up with what's in Deuteronomy 7. Do you feel like you're in a courtroom a little bit? Deuteronomy 7, I'm going to ask you how you could extrapolate from this scripture that the mother must be Jewish. First of all, Judaism didn't exist in Deuteronomy 7. But let's read what it says. So, by the way, the chapter starts with, when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess, and hath cast out many nations before thee, Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them, which you know they didn't. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, which they did. They exchanged children, men and women, to marry, nor show mercy unto them, which they did. Neither, here's the scripture they use, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. Can you extrapolate matrilineal Judaism from that scripture? Because I can't. Please read that properly. That is the text that they use. I cannot get there. And that's not, I am not trying to be malicious. I'm trying to get to the root of something. So where you do see this become, and where you do see the real origins, if you want to call it that, of Judaism starting to pop up on this subject, I might have time to do this. It's a long one here, so let's see if we got time to do this. We're first going to go to the book of Ezra, which is we'll call 5th century, maybe 6th century, somewhere in that ballpark. They are returnees from the exile of the 70 years in Babylon. And there are some very interesting chapters here. Ezra 9 and 10. So here's the big problem, and the header says intermarriage with pagans. Now when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. What does that tell you? It tells you that they are now back in the southern kingdom, returnees from exile. And that tells you that the background of this says they never separated themselves, ever. There may have been a few here and there, but this tells you right here, and specifically the priests and the Levites, that's like, whoa, right? Okay. For they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands, yea, and the hand of the princes and rulers have been chief in this trespass. Princes and rulers. And when I heard this thing, I rent my garment and my mantle and plucked off the hair of my head and off my beard and sat down astonied. Then were assembled unto me every one that trembled at the words of God of Israel, because of the transgression of those that had been carried away. That tells you those in Babylon, and probably before they were carried away, commingled. So what we have here, the law was just read. They just uncovered the book of the law. And as the law was being read, they all wept. Most of them had not heard the law, and the one or two that did, they cried for hearing it again, like welcome home, so to speak. But there were so many that had not heard of it. And at the evening sacrifice, I arose from my heaviness, and having rent my garment and my mantle, I fell upon my knees and spread out my hands unto the Lord my God, and said, O my God, I am ashamed and blush to lift up my face to thee, my God, for our iniquities are increased over our head, and our trespasses grown up unto the heavens. Since the days of our fathers, we have been in a great trespass unto this day. Would you like an interpretation of that one? Since the days of our fathers, we have been in a great trespass unto this day. For our iniquities we have, our kings, our priests, been delivered into the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, and to spoil, and to confusion of face, as is this day. Now for a little space, grace had been shown from the Lord our God, to leave us a remnant to escape, and to give us a nail in his holy place, a safe place or refuge or a place to stay, that our God may lighten our eyes and give us a little reviving in our bondage. For we were bondmen, yet our God hath not forsaken us in our bondage, but extended mercy unto us in the sight of the kings of Persia, gave us a reviving to set up the house of our God, to repair the desolations thereof, and to give us a wall in Judah and in Jerusalem. And now, O God, our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments, which thou hast commanded by thy servants the prophets, saying, the land unto which ye go to possess it is an unclean land, with filthiness of people of the lands, with their abominations, which they have filled from it from one end to the other, with their uncleanness. Now therefore give not your daughters unto their sons, neither take their daughters unto your sons, nor seek their peace or their wealth forever, that ye may be strong and eat the good food, eat the good of the land, and leave it for an inheritance to your children forever. Now, if you keep reading, after this happens, we have something in chapter 10 that's kind of striking. After Ezra had prayed and confessed, verse 2 says, "And Shechaniah the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elan, answered and said unto Ezra, We have trespassed against our God. We have taken strange wives of the people of the land. Yet now there is hope in Israel concerning this thing." And he basically says, guess what? We want to be back in God's grace so badly. I've got an idea. Let's put away all the foreign wives. Let's divorce them and get rid of them. And it's kind of novel, don't you think? It's very convenient. Let's get rid of all of them, and we'll just start over, and we'll start clean with the people that you told us to be with. And what's even more freaky is the close of this book. From verse 18 to verse 44, it's like the perp list, the perpetrator list, right? "And among the sons of the priests that were found that had taken strange wives, namely of the sons of Jeshua, the son of Josadak," and it lists from 18 to 44. And that's just the names that I'm sure they could think of off the top of their heads. So my point here is now you can't just say, okay, let's divorce the wives, and well, what do you do with the children? So what I'm telling you is we have a big problem. Now, I'm not going to give you the conclusion today because I don't have time to, but I can tell you this. I don't care what you're using, we still don't have a concept of matrilineal descent. What we have is basically the people coming to a conclusion that God said, stay with your own kind, but he never said anything about one way or the other. He says evenly, don't give your daughters, don't give your sons, period, nothing more. So this does not explicitly explain anything, and the catalyst to introduce matrilineal descent, as I said, will be an innovation of the 2nd century AD, codified in the Mishnah. But my problem, as always, is that that's the division or the machinations of rabbis, that period begins rabbinic Judaism. Kind of like what happened within the Catholic Church, where you keep having these convocations to keep adding and adding and adding to this book, and you keep adding, and you make it law, and you make it dogma, and you make it doctrine. Well, they did the same thing in the 2nd century forward. So rabbinic Judaism starts there, and that's not what God was after. God's desire to keep a pure seed was never rooted in matrilineal descent, but obedience to his word, which we can see they didn't keep too well. So even after the southern kingdom of Judah returns back to rebuild, perhaps this event marks the beginning in its infancy of the people actually trying to keep within the confines. And remember something, they could not be called Jews globally. They began to be called the Yehudahi from Judah, the southern kingdom, which were those that returned in Ezra and Nehemiah's day. And that nomenclature transferred itself from the men or the people of Judah to the Judahites, which ultimately became the Jewish people. Now, there's much more to this story, and as I said, I'm out of time. But if you're interested in knowing exactly from the time I'm cutting off right here to modern day to understand this, come back next week. That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.